Okay, assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for attending this session of Sharq Diwan, one of the Sharq Youth Network activities. And we are very excited to have Professor Qayyim with us today in this session. Professor Qayyim, he is an assistant professor at the Graduate School of Turkish Studies at Marmara University. And he is specialized in Ottoman, Tasawwuf, and the traditional Japanese culture. And today we will have a speech from Professor Qayyim for around 40 minutes. After that, we will open the floor for the questions. I would like to pass the floor to you, Professor Qayyim.
Oh, can I start? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for inviting me at such a wonderful event. By the way, it's so far from Uskida, that it took almost 1 hour and a half. I think if I didn't learn about Tasawwuf, this was too hardship for me. Because since I learned Tasawwuf, I enjoyed this trip as like a spiritual journey. But as if I felt I'm almost like going to like Greece, I think. It takes like 1 hour and a half to do the thing. Anyway, so today's topic is like Islamic culture diversity in practice. So I would like to talk. So me myself is also like I am Japanese, and also I converted a Muslim 13 years ago. And to be honest, still, maybe I am the newbie. The people sometimes joke to me, for example, I am 13 years old and Muslim. I'm 13 years old and Muslim. But I don't think that's true. That I am 33 years old as a human being, and also I am 33 years old like a Muslim. But yet, this 13 years experience is quite challenging for me sometimes because this is gonna be not my main topic here tonight. But we Japanese Muslim don't have really long history when it compares to Arab Islamic history or the Turkic Islamic history or the Persians or the Malay, any other regions. Because the encountering Islamic civilization in Japan is almost 100 years ago. I mean, the maximum 120 years. And we already have second generation and some third generation, but we don't have really quite strong identity, strong independent identity. And also we have to admit that we haven't reached the level of, for example, articulating Islamic values or the concept with our vocabulary. For example, if you live in Istanbul, you can clearly see that there is a kind of a Turkic, Islamic tradition that they know how to embrace Islamic context within their context. If you go to Egypt, you can also see Egyptian taste, or you can go to Iraq and Syria is also the same. But and myself is that I studied history of Tasawwuf or the Ottoman Empire in the PhD studies. And after finishing my PhD, I tried to expand my own area, not only Tasawwuf in Anatolia, but I have also started to study Islamic history, especially history Tasawwuf in East Asia, especially in China. And it was a really interesting experiences because now we don't know much about the Islamic. I thought that even me, the one who actually finished PhD study, I didn't almost nothing about the Islamic history in East Asia. But I will talk about it later. But the Muslim community, I think Muslim reached to China in some record. It's either 7th century or the 8th century. That even some kind of legend said that one of the Sahaba reached to China to preach about Islam. So, if that is true, then this East Asian Islamic history is one of the oldest tradition in Islamic civilization, oldest civilization. But yet, now we don't know anything about that. When you look about a TV program or a documentary, what we only see is the Muslim minority being oppressed by the Chinese government. I don't know this video is censored or not. But for example, we always encounter political problems with the Chinese government and also the Muslim minorities. But this is also true. This is also a reality. But also this is another reality that there is a rich Islamic tradition who try to express beauty of Islam with their own languages, with their own context, and with their cultures. And now, this is beyond my academic inquiries. This is a project which is really close to my heart. That I want to figure out that that there is some kind of meaning myself that I was that being born in Japan and started to study about like Islam, and also like my family is like a slightly come from like a traditional family. So like for example, my grandmother is also like a student of this tea ceremony, like the culture. So somehow I also belong to the traditional Japanese culture. So I want to use the whole, in Arabic it's called like amana, in Turkish we call emanet. And I feel that in every like personal history is like emanet from Allah. Like there is like a meaning, and I want to make the use of this the whole emanet, so that I did try to find out that what would be my own like expression, or my own like method of like articulating Islamic values. For example, like one of the recent articles, essays which I published is that is it possible to create like a Japanese Islamic culture? Like, is it possible to create Japanese Islamic cultures? And when someone reads this, like the titles, usually most people say that of course it is possible, as long as it follows like a Quran and Sunnah. But this is not the answer. Like, of course, it's possible to create the Islamic culture as long as it follows the Quran and Sunnah. Like, this is like a tautology. But what I want to discuss about this essay is that if possible, then how we can create. And here, like, in this essay, I argue that there is like some like, Japanese traditional cultures which is like really suitable for us to use to extract Islamic values. But also in another articles, I also mentioned about Japanese like manga or the anime. Like, are you watching Japanese manga, like animes, like Naruto, Dragon Ball, like Jujutsu Kaisen? I'm a really huge fan of like Japanese anime. Like, I grew up with a Japanese anime, like a Dragon Ball, like a Son Goku, or I don't know, Trunks, or Kakashi Sensei, Naruto, Sasuke. And my parents were always angry, like when I obsessed with like Japanese anime, because like my mother and the father think that if I too addicted to the Japanese anime, like I cannot be successful in society. But even when I was a teenager, like I feel that there is like a strong spiritual message in like a Japanese anime. And then when I traveled to Istanbul, I stayed with the Turkish students in the student dormitory, and there was also like a Naruto fans. Like, I found that my whole apartment is like filled with like Naruto otakus, but one of my friends told me the really interesting things that he said that when he was reading like Naruto, like, of course this is like in Japanese entertainment, like a Japanese comic book, but also he said that he found some like tasawwufi like contents in here. Like, it means the importance of like sheikh and the murid, importance of like tarbiyat and nafs, importance of like suluk, and also like if you read like Japanese manga, there was always the scene of like tauba, repentance, and not only the repentance of protagonists, but also repentance of like senseis, the shuyukh. So actually, when the protagonist accept the tauba of the shuyukh, senseis, the sensei can become like real sensei, the real teachers. And also, when the protagonists make the tauba with whole their heart, then they can become like a real true hero. Like, this is the whole like structure of the Japanese manga and anime, especially like a shonen like a manga or anime. And when I about to finish my PhD program, like I was so like focusing on like reading like tasawwuf, like classical books like Muzaki Nufus in Turkish language, or like Muhammadiyas or Tariqat al-Muhammadiyya, or in Arabic like Hikam al-Ata'iyya, or like Madarij al-Salikin. And when I'm reading Madarij al-Salikin, like when I read the chapter of Tauba, I suddenly remember the scene of like Full Metal Alchemist and then Naruto, like it's the importance of Tauba. So this is somehow linked. And this is not a joke, like, because this means like, I'm not saying that I'm trying to mixing up in the method like a Zindiq way or something. Like, I'm saying that Japanese know how to use this medium to articulate their traditional values. The traditional value was shuyukh, murid, tauba, repentance, like seiru suluk, spiritual journey. And what we can find in Islamic civilization, even though Islamic civilization is one of the strongest in their intellectual diversity, now if you look at right now in modern society, like we don't know how to introduce this richness to the outside of our community. But look at Japan. Like look at Japan in the world map. It's just so tiny island in the far east. In the far east, but everybody knows Pikachu, right? Everybody knows Pikachu and Mario Kart and something because they know how to like tell. They know how to introduce their values. And right now for the last like 2 or 3 years, and I'm trying to use this like Japanese medium to introduce like Japanese audiences that Islam is not as alien than they think. Because in Japan, like when I talk about Islam, Islam is always introduced as either like a religion in the name of like a dawah or a tabligh, or either in the name of like terrorism, which is influenced by the Western media, like either religion or the terrorism. But this is sort of like a reduced way of like introducing, like and also like a latter way, like seeing like a Muslim community as like a potential of a terrorist is like it's so like a Western centric and also like secular and a devious like a manner way of thinking. But when you look at the history of Islamic civilization, by the way, I've been are you following? Okay. When I think of the history of tasawwuf, sometimes that you don't have to talk about Islam, or you don't have to use the word Islam to introduce about the concept of Islam. And this is also like the same. And I believe that this is also like applicable to the modern society as well. Like I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I have started like a series called Introducing the History of Tasawwuf through shonen manga, like especially like Naruto. So I took a like important theme of Naruto, and I introduced like a concept like a tauba or the suluk or like a lata'if or like a method of like zikr. Right? So that Japanese audience they can find out that actually there are so many like similarities between like Islamic civilization and also like Japanese civilization. So today, I want to talk about how I have reached to this like method to like introduce Islam to the Japanese audiences. So starting from the beginning, why now I have been focusing on like focusing on studying about like Islamic history or in Islam in East Asia, because there is one like famous book called Osan Code Islam. It means about the 5 colors of Islam. This is a really famous book written by a French Orientalist, like Vincent Montaigne. And this book is about like a diversity of Islamic civilization and how the Islamic civilization they developed the cultural diversity within the one values of like a Tawheed. And he listed, there is like a 5 color of the cultural diversity in Islamic civilization. And one is Arab, of course. And second is Perso India. It means like, the civilization or the region using like Persian languages. And third is a Turk. And fourth is Malay. And fifth is like Africa. And I think, what the Vincent Montaigne intended is that now this is time for like European Muslim to develop their own method of articulation of the Islam. But when I have read this, one of my friends who was living in European countries, he introduced me this book, and I read it. But when I read this book, I found it really awkward because, for example, like I myself is Japanese, but where I'm located in this book, like I'm not Arab, and I'm not Persian India, and I'm Turkic, but maybe I'm becoming Turkish, but but still I'm not Turkish. But I'm not Malay in Africa. So there is like huge, how can I say? There's a serious like a collective like amnesia. Like he himself is like a Vincent Montaigne. Like he's not just like ordinary like Orientalist. He himself is also Muslim, but he didn't have like perspective like towards like Asia. But as I said, like if you see the history of China, like some people say that this is like a legendary record, but there is like a masjid in China, and it said that it was built in the 7th century or the early 8th century. And in this concept, from this perspective, as I said, this East Asian Islamic history is actually like the longest, or maybe you can say one of the oldest history of the Islamic civilization. But we don't know how we can make a benefit from it. like in Turkish called like istifade etmek yani. Ve nasıl bir istifade edebileceğini yani bilmiyoruz. Like we don't know how to like make use of it. We can take the like lesson from the history. And now we have the Muslim community in Korea, and now also have the Muslim community in Japan as too. But and when we look about like Islamic studies about it in East Asia, for example, usually done in the Western like Islamic scholarship, American Islamic scholarship, they always emphasize that how this Chinese like scholar try to synthesize like a Confucianism like with like Islamic worldview, or how they try to use this Buddhist or like Taoist or Confucian vocabulary and try to like explain this Islamic context to the community. And later I'm going to talk about this detail, but in some way this is true, but sometimes I felt that they try to make this Chinese Islamic tradition like too exotic, like as if like they're trying to make like a Pikachu version of Islam or something. But we must not forget that, for example, like Farabi's like Madinat al-Fadila, like everybody knows about the Farabis or Ibn Sina's or other Islamic philosopher, they borrow like a Greek concept or Greek terminology to articulate the Islamic concept, isn't it? And so there is like an Islamic Aristotelian like a worldview of articulating the Islamic concept, and there is a Confucianistic worldview of articulating the Islamic concept. And if you call this East Asian Islamic exotic, then this Greek, using this Greek terminology to explain Islamic worldview also it should be exotic. But somehow, I don't know why, but if you look at it, like for example, like Turkish academia, like everybody thinks that this Ibn Sina or Aristotelian or Ibn Sina or Farabi method of how can you say, articulating Islamic philosophy is somehow like a standard, and something which is some other like Islamic scholar not using this method is like exotic, or something which not has any value in it. But this is, I feel that this is, yes, like it was like a mainstream of the Ottoman like academia, like Ottoman like Islamic scholarship, like yes, but and Ottoman Empire is like one of the strongest and the biggest like Islamic empire in history, like yes, but it doesn't mean that it is like a standard of Islamic civilization. And for example, like if you travel to like Iraq or the Egypt or the other region, there is like another like a version or of like Islamic scholarship. Or if you travel to like Central Asia, there is like another tradition. In Malay, it is different. In India, is also different. And when it comes to like in China, it's different. And what we must forget that that before the modernization, when there was the existence of like Khilafah, the unification of the Ummah, like there was like a diversity of like Islamic sciences. And these are the famous hadiths like تحدث الناس على قدر عقولهم, right? تحدث الناس على قدر عقولهم. I think Islamic scholars is that they know the importance of these hadiths, that they're not trying to like make like Islamic discourse exotic. Like they know the audiences they're facing, and they just build like a best method to explain like an Islamic concept, and that's it. And well, why now? Now I have been like working on like studying the Chinese Islamic classic called like Han Kitab. This is one example, Han Kitab. And this is also another beauty of Islamic civilization. Like whenever you go in the Muslim country, book is always called like a kitab, book. For example, in Turkish it's kitab. In Malay is also kitab. In Arabic, of course, it's kitab because it's Arabic. And for example, in the I also asked like a Bosnian friend, but he also said, the kitab is like kitab, like book is also kitab. And and why is that? I think I believe that this shows that Islamic civilization is based on like idm, like knowledges. And if you hear like a sound kitab, then even like a traveler from outside of the society, they can notice there is like tradition of like Islamic knowledges is surviving there. And in China it's also the same. Like for example, in Japanese we don't have Muslim communities, so we don't use like a kitab. We say hon. Hon means like a book. But Han means like Chinese character, and kitab is kitab. It means like Islamic like book, Islamic classic written in the Chinese character. And I am suggesting my students to read this the Han Kitab not because like this is my like exact example of Islamic civilization, but because we can learn a lot of lesson from the Han Kitab as like a minority literature as a Muslim, like a minority like a literature. So it means that I believe that there is like a universal like a message as the people who living as like a ghuraba, in this world. I will just explain. For example, in the Muslim, as for like Muslim community in China, they have always been existed as like a minority, and also they always have to express, they always have to introduce Islam to like a non-Muslim and also Muslim who does have who didn't have like enough literacy to understand Islam. It means like, for example, some of the ulamas, like they were able to travel like Central Asia or either in India. Usually they travel to Central Asia and they study like Persian or Arabic, and they brought back to the Islamic classic. When they back to their own country, they have to face like a Muslim community who cannot read like Arabic, who cannot read like Persian, or who does. Or sometimes they have to teach like Islam to who doesn't know what the meaning of like a salat or what the meaning of the prophet or even like Allah, and when it comes, and one of the difficult like challenge, what's the most like challenging thing is that how they can translate those Islamic like a concept to like a Chinese like a languages, because language, every language is based on their like a worldview, and the Chinese like a worldview is not based on like a Tawhid. So it and also the concept of like prophecy is not something like which is like really well like shared in the Chinese Muslim community. Then, for example, like in this Ma Baidang, he in his like introduction of his book, he honestly expressed like difficulties of like translating like Islamic content in Chinese. He said that if it is not in Chinese, it cannot be understood by the people here. By people here, it means like both like a Muslim and non-Muslim living in China. And when he tried to express only in Chinese, it not fit the Islamic doctrine, because it means that if you cannot use like Arabic terminologies, and if you just only focus on using like Chinese, pure Chinese terminologies, then nobody understand that this is like about like Islam. So this. And what is interesting is that Chinese Muslim scholars are so sincere in this that I found so many complaints found in the introduction. Like usually in introduction, they always confess that how difficult to write the books. Like as if I saw like PhD students in the 18th century or 17th century, they always said that how struggled they wrote in the book. And why it is so difficult to translate Islamic Islamic concept, usually Arabic or Persian, into Chinese languages? Because their language have a really completely different like paradigm. For example, like this Latin alphabet or Arabic alphabet is categorized as like a phonogram, and phonogram is like the alphabet which is only used to express the sound. But Chinese character is called like a logogram. Or sometimes they say like a diagram. And this logogram is that this character, for example, as you can see in the center, this means he. If you have any read like a Naruto, Naruto is in the last episode, he will become like the leader of the ninjas clan, and he become like Hokage. Hokage means the ninja or the fire, and this Ho is come from this Chinese character. So this is also the symbol of Naruto, by the way. This is off the topic, but this shape itself is not only show the sound of this character, but it also represent the shape of the fire. So, for example, like and the right side of the picture, this is the Chinese translation of the Quran. I think this is Surah Al-Fatiha. Yeah, it's Surah Al-Fatiha, and yes. There's 2 lines there, and the upper one is the transliteration of transliterated Chinese character. It shows the pronunciation of the Arabic letters. So it said Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin in Chinese letter, and the below line is the real Chinese like a translation of the Surah Al-Fatiha. So they have to, so they have to first they have to transliterate the Arabic letters, and then the next step, they will translate into like real Chinese like languages. So they require like these two steps. And this is also like same in the Korean languages and also like Japanese languages. Next. And another one, like Sheikh Killing, he's also like a Muslim Chinese scholar. He also like, confessed the difficulties of the introducing Islamic concept to Chinese audiences. He said, I try to make sure the sound of the East and the West were correct, and that the contents was correct. But I tried to make sure the sound of the East and West were correct, and that contents was correct. And I would actually convey the words, or if I could have written on behalf of the author. He means that what he intended in this introduction is he wanted to build like a linguistic bridge between like a Western civilization, but according to them, the West means like Islamic civilization, and the Eastern civilization, which is like a Chinese civilization. And one of the solutions that they have invented is called, this is my, this terminology is I invented terminology. It's called like semantic reconstruction. It means like, as long as they can transliterate the Arabic letters, that nobody can understand like what they're talking about. So they borrow some of the like special terminologies which were once used in like Buddhism or the Taoism or Confucianism, but they reinterpret this terminology from the Islamic content. For example, there's one concept called three vehicle, and these three vehicles was usually used in the Buddhism. So, for example, first vehicle is the someone who in the phase of the to be taught and guided. It means that they're still like trainee. And the second one is that to become the one who reached the enlightened like stage. It means that those who realized the hakika. And third stage is not only that he reached to the reality, but the one who can lead the others to understand the hakika. So this is the first stage, and the second stage, and the third stage. And he reinterpret these terminologies. So he just borrowed this Chinese character, but he put Islamic meaning in it. So he said that this first vehicle should be understood as like Sharia, those who are in practice of Sharia. And second one is like the stage of the Sufis, those who like completed the training and reached the Hakika. But the third one is in Arabic calls like either Sheikh al-Kamil al-Mukammil. That's those who can make the others to reach to the perfection. So this is called like semantic conclusion. And some of the research, so the reason why I said that some of the Western like Islamic scholarship and Chinese Islamic tradition is making Chinese Islamic traditions too exotic means that they are not just like building like a patchwork of the borrowing like Buddhism and Taoism and just doing like a Zindiq like a version of Chinese Islam. They just borrow terminologies, but they extract the Buddhist meaning in it and just they use the function of this Chinese character and put the Islamic meaning in it. And this Liu Zi, so Liu Zi is considered as like a Chinese version of the Ghazali. Like he is one of the most like famous Chinese scholar in the Islamic civilization. But he himself is, I think, like super genius. Like he's like a Islamic classic is considered as like a Chinese like a canon of the Islamic philosophy and Aqidah Tasawwuf. But again, I read one of his like Chinese translation of the Sirat al-Nabawiyya, and in this introduction, he also, as well, he confessed about the hardship of his life, and he said that, and this is like kind of like a poem. He said, "I have no friends to live with, and no comrade to work with, and my relatives and close friends say that I spend my time doing unproductive things, and I never once felt relief in my heart." He said that he had been translating like numerous like 100 books, Islamic classic into Chinese, and he also like original books about Islamic theology. But he said that nobody appreciated his work. Like just imagine, like like you want to study about like Islamic studies or Islamic philosophy, but your parents always encouraged me that to become like a lawyer or the engineering or computer engineering to make money. And they said that you are ashamed of your family, your family relative, that you are not giving money to our family. This is like what we are facing right now is already experienced by the Chinese scholars living in the 18th century. So that's why I said that this Han Kitab is not only about just about learning about Islamic knowledges, but this is like a trace of the personal, like individual experiences who live as like a Muslim minority in the non-Muslim like a society. So you can read this Han Kitab as kind of like a literature, the minority literature. Like this is what I'm talking about. And I think this is not only limited to the Chinese Islamic classic as well, because sometimes when we are working how can I say dealing with the classic, we only try to cherish classic as like a classics, and we tend to see the person who know how to read the classic is like those who know how to preserve this knowledge, and that's it. Like you only see this scholar as like an authority, but I hope I'm making myself clear, but you can read the classic to understand like individual history of the authors, and also you can compare your life with the other experiences, so that you can digest your own experience as well. So that's why sometimes I call this Han Kitab as like a global literature in China, like a global literature. So this is how you, and I feel, for example, that when I read this poem, like actually I found some kind of like salvation in it. And I felt that this is also like emanate from Allah, because this poem is actually telling that he was also suffering, but it also tells me like we are not alone. Like this, this Muslim, the difficulties of Muslim minorities, or like Islamophobia, or our relatives who never understand, our effort. Like this is all like a universal thing that the Muslim have been facing. Another one is I said, for example, Islamophobia. Like now, when it comes to Islamophobia, like issues, like we tend to discover Islamophobia in Europe, either in Europe or America or India. But there was like Islamophobia, or at least we can say like prejudice existed in the Chinese society as well. Well, there was a famous scholar called Jin Tianzu, and he wrote a treatise called Qingjin Xie. It's eliminating the doubts against Islam. And I don't know about the other Islamic classic in the other region, but I think as long as in the Chinese society, I think this is the first book which is written against like a prejudice against the Muslim society, like prejudice against the Muslim society. And this Jin Tianzu, for example, Liu Zi, he was an Islamic scholar. But this Jin Tianzu, he was employed by the translation department of the Hanli Academy. It's like part of like a Chinese like empire, and in this translation department, imagine that you have to work in the department in the UK or America, in translation department in the like Ministry of the Education, and you have to work with the non-Muslims. And of course, you can find like good friends, but also you have to deal with the bad friends as well. There's those who have like prejudice about like Islam or the life of the Muslim. And in this introduction, he also said that that he got shocked at how can I say jahid, ignorant, the other like non-Muslim Chinese were about like Islam, and that's why he wrote this. And there was a really like moving, like touching sentence in this poem. That he said that as long as you knew something, you must not be silent. It means that you have to prove yourself that you know something, but not only that. So he authored this book to eliminate the doubts against Islam, to eliminate doubts in Islam. Not only like being patient about prejudice, that you must be in the public, so that to show that you are knowledgeable about. And for example, like in this introduction, he said that some Chinese says that some Chinese they are scared of Muslim because they think that so they're asking why Muslims are using like a different calendar, and why Muslims speak different languages, like dressing differently, or they are so picky on food and drink when they go to the restaurant, and and why they are not eating during the daylight in the certain month, which will come inshallah, and what kind of God they believe in. Like just look at all the questions that he listed in this book. Every question that he wrote is actually the question that we are facing right now in the modern society. And but what makes him great is that he was not just, how can I say, defensive or apologetic about Islam. For example, like he never compromised with the majority society. He said that these non-Muslim Chinese, they know nothing about us, means a Muslim, because he said Islam has contributed to the country's development for 1,100 years, from Sui and Tang dynasty to present. And he said that there's the vision of Islam is not different from the Confucian ideal. But furthermore, he said that Chinese Muslim is actually the people who preserve the ideals of the China. What he said is that Chinese Muslim are more Chinese than the ordinary Chinese. Because one of the arguments that because in Muslim, they still believe in like Sharia, the law or the ritual. It means that they are still practicing. They're not like talking about Islam. They are always put in the practice, in application. But he said that look at the other like ordinary Chinese, like Buddhists, or other, like they can talk about the beautiful things, but they are not in the practice. I mean, of course, I'm sure that there are also like sincere like Buddhists or the Taoists or the Confucians, those who are practicing their ideals. But what makes me touch and move is that his strong like attitude against like a prejudice. Like imagine that you are living in the Muslim minority, you might be like only one Muslim in like translation department in the Ministry of Education in the UK or America, and you said that that I am more British than you are, or I am more American than you are. Because in this book, for example, he quote not only the Islamic classic, but he also quote the Chinese classic, because in the good sense that to show that how knowledgeable he was, but in more like frankly speaking, that he's showing off that how smart he was. Like. And so in this way, I'm trying to learn like tradition of the East Asian Islamic civilization, how you say, like heritage, because the reason is that there is one favorite scene from the Hikaru no Go. This is also Japanese manga, and in the last volumes of the Hikaru no Go, the one protagonists were asked why you are playing this traditional like a board game, like a Ego, and it's a long story, but it was a really interesting. He said that so this Ego game is like a traditional board game. So it's about like a tradition, like why he trying to stick in the tradition. And he said that to link the far past until the far future. That it means like look about Liu Zi's or Jin Tianzu's, all the Chinese scholars. Like if we don't study about their history, then who's gonna remember their suffering? Who's gonna remember their like happiness? Who's gonna remember their like efforts? Like their memory would just disappear in the human history. Like it means that we have to link their effort not only to the present, but for the future generation to make their like life as like something. Yeah, am I explaining it clear? Like so this is not only by ourselves, but this is for them. It means that those who live as like a grabber in the past, and for the future generation who might have to live as like a grabber in a non-Muslim society, that telling them that they are not alone. Like maybe I might not be able to write this kind of like a message in an academic article, but this is like a really important thing. Like why we are studying about like Islamic history. Like this is not only about like getting PhD. This is not only about like making our like uncles or like aunts like happy that are making money as like a computer engineering. So like I was so unsuccessful about like math or something, so I couldn't get into security or engineering, by the way. Like this because this also thing, this studying about tradition, this is also the only we can do. The only like Chat GPT cannot do this thing. Like they only like they're only like showing that the things they learn, but they are just consuming the data as the data. But when we are reading this Hankitab, or when we are learning about life with uses, when we are witnessing the strongness of the Jin Tianzus, like we are not learning this classic as just one like data or like written text. Like we can inherit their like emotions that well. And I believe like this is like only that. So today's topic is how like about like. Thinking about modernity from the Japanese Muslim perspective. But this is not only about Japanese Muslim perspective. Like this is about a human being. I think now, for example, this is a little bit off the topic, but yesterday I used this Chat GPT for the first time, and I was so surprised. For example, I asked this Chat GPT to write about life of Rumi and try to make like a academic proposal of it, and he. I mean, I don't know is he or she, but it's AI. This produced like a perfect academic proposal that I have never achieved in my whole life. So like just like so as long as we stick on like the academic inquiries, like maybe we cannot beat this the deep learning AI forever. But still, for right now, this like a Chat GPT, they cannot trace the emotions of the authors. Like this is what only the human being, the tangible, the not everlasting, like immortal human being can learn it, because like we know that our life is not like for everlasting, and since we are tangible and immortal, that's why we know the importance of the individual life, and so this is how I have been like working with the Islamic classics, and. The next project, so why I have started this Japanese Islamic culture, because as I said, I don't want this like Islamic classic live only as a classic which is taught in like in a PhD program or at a library, because if you, for example, if you travel like Asian country, like Japan's or like Korea's, or maybe our country is the same. Like you can, or if you look at I see actually the European countries is more better example. For example, when I travel like France, and I visited like some of the biggest like museum there, and is it Louvre? I don't know. I'm not sure remember which one, but when I visited like museum in France, I am so surprised that they have one of the like best like artifacts or like books or the clothes from like Algeria or the North African countries, and just they store there, and why is there? And also like a museum in the UK, like I visited the British Museum and I saw like a really fancy samurai armor or other like Japanese artifacts, and also like Arab artifacts or the clothes and classic books as well. But they were not using it, just store it and displaying it. It means like they are not they are not trying to, so they just stored it, but they are not allow people to trace the emotions of the individual who made these Islamic classics or made this Islamic or the clothes or the artifacts, and I think it's about the I think the book Colonizing Egypt, or maybe other books. Like this is how the colonialism worked. That this is one of the reasons why it invented like a museum or library. Like one thing is that they don't want to store, but they want to build a new identity for the colonized people, so that so they see the tradition is like a dead, the store in the museum or library, and we are not allowed to like inherit it. And right now, like. For example, in Japanese classic also same, the Chinese Islamic also same. Like that, I don't want this as long as when it's stored in the museum or the library, that it means that this classic is dead. Like I want this Islamic classic to be expressed or preserved, and also inherit the next generation in the family or in a house or individual houses or in the daily lives, and when we look about like Japanese Islamic like cultures, I found that there are so many like popular cultures who are trying to combining or preserving and also transmitting their traditional values to the next generation. So I found that this, I can use this like Japanese culture as like a medium, the method to preserve not only like Japanese values but also like Islamic classic as well. And also, as like a Japanese Muslim, I think it is really important for us to think about, like, even though like, we might not be able to create our own cultures, but at least we need to think about like what would be like Japanese Islamic cultures, because especially this is a problem among the Muslim converts, like even myself. For example, when I become like a Muslim, I became Muslim in Egypt, by the way, in Cairo, in Jamia Assad. Like I was so there was like a high. There was a moment that the Muslim comments become so high, they so become happy, and they try to, for example, I try to express my like Muslimness in somehow. So I bought garabeya in Cairo, and I wear it in everyday life, and it looks normal in Egypt and Cairo, but when I went back to Japan, I look like some kind of like a character in the Disneyland. It won't fit. Like it's cool, but and so I found another way. When I traveled to Malaysia and Indonesia, I also find like a batik. It's like a traditional Indonesian Malay like a clothes. So, and it's closer to Japan compared to Egypt. So maybe I started to wear like Indonesian Malay batik, but again I look like some like a tourist like Japanese tourist traveling to Hawaii or something. Like it also become cool. But since we don't have like rich like Japanese Islamic cultures, like some people, even including me, I thought that becoming Muslim is like becoming Arab or becoming Turkish or like becoming Malay or Persian. But this is not the case. For example, like look at the Turkish people. Whenever they go, they keep their strong Turkishness, right? And it's also when it comes to like Iraqi people and Syrian people, they have their own pride of their own cultures. And I think we Japanese Muslims, we should learn from from them as well. Like because as I said, this Japaneseness is that we must not stick in like some kind of cheap nationalistic like discourse, but at least this being born in Japan, being surrounded by Japanese culture is also like emanet, like amana from the Allah. And as long as, and as I said, until the Japanese Islamic culture is created, like Islam will remain like alien to Japan. Like the non-Muslim Japanese think that this Islam is only for the religion for the people who live in the Middle East or the Central Asia or the Indonesia. Like when we reach the level to explain, to articulate the concept of Islam within our own language, like Japanese or the Japanese culture, then that is the moment that the Japanese think that this Islam might become like the part of the Japanese history. Or further, maybe they might think that this Japanese Islamic culture is the best version of like Japanese cultures, as like Jin Tianzu like stated. And this like a cultural project, for example, there is like famous article written by the Sheikh Omar Farooq Abdullah, I think the Muslim and the cultural imperative or something. And he said that in building a successful indigenous Muslim culture cannot be left to occur like haphazardly, unconsciously, or without direction. And I took this sentence really seriously. It means that when you want to think about the cultures, you cannot just like wait and see like the culture will come out. Like there is like we need like individual like who take the step forward to think that what would be like their own unique way of expressing the Islam. For example, like now think about the example in Turkish like Islamic cultures, like Mimar Sinan. Like without the Mimar Sinan, maybe the Turkish society might not be able to reach their own expression of Islam. Like he himself put forward. Maybe he might also encounter lots of like difficulties or challenges, but thanks for him, now the Turkish society they have like a pride that they have their own heritage or tradition of like Islamic art or like Islamic aesthetics, and I think every society have their own version like a Mimar Sinan as well, and in Japanese too. Like we might start this process that maybe like a Japanese version of Mimar Sinan might appear in the 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 3,000 years. And during this process, like I came to one, not conclusion, but so the one idea came to me that maybe this traditional Japanese tea ceremony culture might be like one of the example for us to think that for creating the Japanese Islamic cultures. The reason why I came up with this idea is that when I was studying about like Tasawwuf history in Anatolia, there is a Mevlevi tariqa in Korea, like Mevlevi, like Maulavi. It's a Sufi tariqa established by Jalaluddin Rumi. And when you visit like a Konya, you might find like a dariha, turbe, grave of the Jalaluddin Rumi there. And in the next of this building, there was a kitchen in Konya, and there was famous like saying of the Rumi like Hamudun Pishtik Yandik. Hamud is I was raw, means I was inexperienced. I didn't know anything. But Pishtik means I was cooked. This cook is not in the meaning of cannibalism. Like it means a cook means I got the education, spiritual education by the master, like Naruto, like Kakashi Sensei, imagine Kakashi Sensei, and Yandik, and I got burned by the love of Allah. And in order to put this philosophy into practice, this Mevlevi tariqat, they use this kitchen as a place for the spiritual education. For example, like Muqaddam is like a second, he's like a supporter of the sheikh, the great sheikh of the Sufi tariqat. He's like a number 2 tariqat. Like usually this Muqaddam was they appointed as like a chef of this kitchen, and he appointed like other trainee to like prepare like a chorba in like soup or like sherbet, or I don't know, like a merjibek chorbası, or preparing like an ayran, or preparing like a kebab, or sometimes they just order the training to clean the whole kitchen. But this every like work in the kitchen is actually the process of the spiritual training. And when I studied this history, I immediately remember there was exactly like same tradition exists in Japanese cultures. One is the Zen Buddhist like kitchen cultures. So in Turkey there is Mevlevi mutfak, like matbakh al-Mawlawiya, and in Japan we have like matbakh Zen Buddhism, and another one is the tea ceremony, like a tea ceremony. For example, in Yemen, there was a famous Sufi tariqah, I think tariqat Aydarusi or something. They also use like a kahwa, like drinking kahwa as like a method of like a zikr, as a method of like khidmah, or the method of like serving to the like others for like spiritual training. So in Yemen there is a kahwa. In Japan we have like a matcha, this green tea, to learn the importance of like khidmah, like not khidmah to like a divine being, and also khidmah to the like masters, and also khidmah towards the like others, like other like people. So what I want to say here is that we can also use this as like Chinese Muslim scholar did when they trying to write down this like Islamic classic. Like we can just extract the message from this tradition, and we can just put the Islamic meaning in it, like semantic reconstruction of like Japanese cultures. Like we are not just like compromising like Buddhism cultures or other cultures. Like we just extract this element like with respect, and we can just make put Islamic interpretation in it, and try to seek the harmony within their own society. And with my own arrogance, like I want to show that maybe we can build like a little bit better version of like Japanese cultures, which is created by like Zen Buddhists or the other like non-Japanese. So right now I'm doing this this cultural experiment, but I always try to follow these two like rules to take example from the tradition but other Islamic culture spheres. Not only like studying about like Quran and Hadith, but also I'm trying to like read like Islamic classics written by Islamic scholars as much as possible. And second one is to understand the spirituality present in traditional Japanese culture, and look for similarity to like Islamic cultures. For example, like one example is this. Oh, it's too dark. You can see. This is one of the traditional like a tea room, and this now if you look about like Wikipedia, or maybe you can maybe if you ask like ChatGPT, like they might answer that this tea ceremony culture is part of the Zen Buddhism culture. But if you study about history of Japan really seriously, actually it was wrong. Like this tea ceremony culture became the part of Zen Buddhism culture because it was developed or interpreted by the Zen Buddhists. I hope I'm making this clear. Like, since the Zen Buddhist like intellectual interpret, they put their own interpretation to the tea room, so that's why it became like tea room. Imagine, for example, this room. Like, is this room like Islamic or non-Islamic? It's neutral. Room is just a room. Just as like a Twitter, just like a video, just like the like language itself, like this, like alat, device. Like device is just like a device. Like just what we can do is that being like a living as a Muslim or like being like Islamic doesn't mean that you put your money to the Islamic band or consuming or just listening to the Islam. So like a TikTok video of like Islamic or the preachers or just like watching like YouTube video made by Islamic scholars. This is just you're consuming. So like Islamish like a content. Like especially if you live in a non-Muslim society, like being Muslim is not just like consuming the Islamic content, but you should produce like, or you should like show that Islamic interpretation of like towards like things. Like when it comes to like even the spoon, like even the spoon is possible. The spoon is so just neutral, but as long as you put the meaning in it, or as long as you can understand that everything is actually like an ayah or the creation of Allah, and if we can articulate this richness of the like, divine creation to the audiences, then this is the moment that this device have like Islamic like meaning in it. For example, in this Japanese tea training, people are using this traditional fan, and in this like traditional tea ceremony fan, tea ceremony, this poem about tea ceremony philosophy is printed. So, and usually these tea ceremony students, they always carry this fan, and when they have time, instead of like watching TikTok, they open this fan and try to memorize like this tea ceremony like a poem. And when you travel to the Islamic civilization, like I'm sure you have encountered, like for example, like there is like 1,000 like a poem about like aqidah or like a fiqh or a tasawwuf. And students in the kutab, first they memorize this poem without even understanding the meaning of it, right? And this in Japan as well, they have like a similar tradition. So what I did is that I got the inspiration for this tea ceremony fan. So I invented Ryuzi fan. Ryuzi fan is that I make a critical edition from this Chinese Islamic classic, and this poem is written by this Chinese Islamic scholar like Ryuzi, and it talk about like a concept of Allah, what is the meaning of life, and what is the importance of finding your sheikh, and what is the importance of accepting the mortality of the human being, and what is the importance of seeking the like akhirah. So this is like a talk about general worldview of Islam. So I ask like a traditional fan craftsman in Kyoto, in Japan, and I asked him to design this Islamic like like traditional like a fan. So what I want to do is that I want to create like a new Japanese like a tradition, like a new Japanese tradition, like not just bringing like alternative culture from outside, but using this Japanese like a tradition, like this art craft, and try to harmonize like Islamic concept and the Japanese like art craft. Something like this, and and this fan is actually originally invented in Japan. So this is purely like Islam, like Japanese like cultures. But I'm not using this Japanese culture to show that how great the Japanese culture is. Like I'm just using this as like a device, like a medium, to show both respect to both like Japanese cultures, and also like like Islamic like values. And as I said, my main purpose is I don't want this Islamic classic only stored in the library. Like this fan, you cannot store in the library because this fan. And also you cannot store in the museum because this is like a new tradition, so it doesn't have any values in it. I have been carrying this fan for more than I think 3 years. Yeah, 3 years. So that when I have a time, well, I have also like weak nafs, so sometimes I go defeated. I'm watching like YouTube instead. But still, like when I have time, I try to open this fan and try to remember that I'm not alone. Because as you can see, the Liuzi, confessed his loneliness in the family. So this is how I'm trying to inherit, the emotions of the Liuzis or the life of Liuzis. And another project is that after this program, yes, I'm going to finish, don't worry. Right, is that during this tea ceremony, we use like a tea container, and usually this tea container, there was like a picture about, I don't know, like flowers or the leaves or some kind of Chinese character. And there is some kind of, I'm going to show you later, but there is some kind of movement that purify the tea container. And this is actually a symbol of, of the purifying your own like a heart. And so now I'm asking another like a craftsman in Kyoto to design this like this tea container, which is like this Arabic calligraphy, like a printed on it. Like I'm going to show if I can use it or not, because this represents some of the divine meaning. So actually, I want your help to. So now I'm studying about like hadith as much as possible about the creating the cultures or respecting the cultures, because I don't want to create something which is against like like a prophetic like a sunnah. But as long as when I see like traditional like handcrafts, for example, in Ottoman societies or Persian society, I saw so many like handcrafts where the Arabic calligraphies or the other like miniatures are printing on it. So I'm just trying to one example of what would be like a Japanese version of it, like a Japanese version of something. For example, look at the calligraphy in the pictures, and as I said, like we before using this tea container, there was like some like ritual about like purifying this tea container, and actually this symbolizing the purifying yourself. And this calligraphy is you can find in the Urujami in Bursa, and this 4 vow character is actually represents Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the mu'min and the munafiq. And this actually represents that the biggest one is Allah, and the second one is the Prophet, and the mu'min and the munafiq. And this clearly shows that even the munafiq is actually a part of this world, but unfortunately, the munafiq doesn't realize that they also have like a grace of like a divine. And this is how talk about like reality, the hakika of the like macrocosmos. Like Allah is like constantly showing the grace toward into the khulq, the creation. And the Prophet is trying to convey this message, and the mu'min, they are like replying to the message. But the munafiq, even though they are in this crisis, but they couldn't answer it. So I'm just curious that maybe we can use when we see this container and when we purifying this, like we can remember this hakika as like a method. Like, still, I haven't used this, but I'm just using it as an example. And one of the reasons why I'm using this traditional artifact as like a medium of creating a new Japanese traditional culture is that now we are in like the secularized and modernized society. Now less and less Japanese people are using this traditional like artifact. Like most of them, they are going to like IKEA. Like it's also, you can also go to IKEA in Istanbul because it's cheap. And it's fine, right? Or like LC Waikiki, so I don't know, that's nothing. And they are, and less than the Japanese people also like wear like a traditional clothes. And why I am showing respect to these traditional artifacts or traditional culture in Japan, not because I'm Japanese, but because I'm studying about like Islam or the Islamic civilization. And the reason is, for example, if you just like ordinary Japanese who only watch Naruto and Pikachu and that's all, like which clothes you would choose? Like clothes from like Zara or this is Japanese traditional kimono. Of course, if you go to Zara because it's cheap and efficient and it's cool. And in modernity, the modernity only cherishes like something which is efficient and something which is like reasonable. It means like cheaper, because to maximize the asset of the product. But if you are like a Muslim, like if you want to like practice like values of Islam, like when you wear this like a Japanese kimono, like what can you express? Like for example, like if you go to Zara, then if you wear like fancy like t-shirts, like skinny t-shirts, then you might be cool, but you cannot express your own like a takwa, right? But if you wear this Japanese kimono, then you can cover your body line and you can express like modesty by like hiding your body. So it means that I believe, maybe this is a little bit arrogant, but I believe that as the one who got inspired by this Jian Tianzu's like philosophy, I believe that only this Islam can put a meaning to the Japanese culture again. It means like since I not only the Japanese or not only as a Muslim, like since I am the Japanese Muslim, like I have like a meaning of choosing this traditional kimono rather than like a cool Zara T-shirt. Like, and this is what I'm talking about, like a semantic like reconstruction. Like we have our own like semantic worldview towards like a product, and and I want to. Only 10 minutes. I can finish here, but so right now, for example, like in the left side in the picture, this is like the traditional Japanese like sweets used in like a traditional tea ceremony. But in Istanbul, it's pretty difficult to find. But even without this like wagashi, like a traditional Japanese sweet, still we can conduct like tea ceremony by using like tamar, like dates, because this is also it's delicious and it shows humbleness, and this is also like sunnah of Prophet. So it means like we can put a different meaning to a tea ceremony. Like for example, like sometimes like Japanese artists they stick on the formality as well, and sometimes they lost like in the meaning of it. But we can rediscover that what is the true meaning of the Japanese culture again. And then, for example, that one of the main messages of tea ceremony is called wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is the aesthetic of simplicity and aesthetic of the modesty. And if you study about the life of the Prophet, actually, in the last very moment, he only eats like the dates and the water, right? So this is how they show the rida, state of rida, a state of like a gratitude for the grace of Allah. And in this tea ceremony, like instead of using this cute wagashi, it's cute, I want to use it, but also we can build our own method of expressing our own values. So this is what I'm trying to find. This is what I want to try to do. Like creating this Japanese Islamic culture is that I'm not trying to invent like a traditional like a Pikachu way of like articulating Islam. I want to rebuild the structure of the Japanese traditional worldview through the Islamic spiritualities. And through this process, maybe I might not become successful, but this is just like a first step. Maybe in the 100 years, or 1,000 years, or 3,000 years, until the Yawm al-Qiyamah, inshallah. Maybe and then, like a Japanese version of Mimar Sinan will appear. Like maybe the Japanese version of Ghazali will appear. So this is why I want to be like I am ready to become I say kurban. Huh? Sacrifice, yeah. We can become just like a cornerstone, like I'm ready to become like a sacrifice. I'm ready to become like unsuccessful cases to prepare for this. The successful cases might come in the near future, like inshallah. So this is what I'm trying to do for recently. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Professor Khayyam, for this informative session and for this interesting topics. Now we will open the floor for the questions. So if there is any questions from the participants, yes, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. I don't know, should I call you Mr. Qayyim or Mr. Naomi? Or
Naoki.
Naoki?
Yeah, Naomi is a female name.
Yeah. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, my Turkish friends are also call me
okay,
Naomi.
I will stick with Qayyim, inshallah.
I'm not Naomi Campbell, I'm Naoki.
So it was a wonderful speech. Thank you very much. We really enjoyed it. And we wanted you to even go longer, although maybe the moderator won't agree. But inshallah, we want to benefit from you with just some, I'm not going to call them questions, but just some ideas I wrote down, and I want to share it with you, and then I want your comments on them. Maybe I summarize them into like 3 main ideas. So the first idea that you repeatedly mentioned, and you try to emphasize the importance of legacy and history, like, Turkey has, or Ottoman, they have Memar Sinan and etc. etc. But like from my perspective, or the way I see it, you don't have to have a long history to make an impact, because even Memar Sinan, or even Muhammad al-Fatih did not have a long history in Istanbul or in Turkey to make a big impact. As a Muslim, you are the example of the Prophet gave, like whatever you were planted, you will grow. You don't have to have, you know, like a longer, of course, the longer the roots you have, the higher you go. But if you are cut in the middle and you are put in any land, you should be able to grow because you have Quran and Sunnah within you. So it doesn't really, we don't really have to look for that deep historical, I want to call it pretext or justification for your existence. Okay,
Yeah.
because Islam, even when it came the time of the Prophet, no one knew about the Quran and no one قالوا وما الرحمن. So, but it still establishes itself as the real power, because at the end the truth will stand regardless. So the falsehood will perish and the truth will stand regardless of who brought it. So this is just like an idea I heard you repeating. So because if you only look for that historical legacy, then we won't have any hope to build an Islam or share Islam with some maybe far away tribes in some countries, or maybe in Australia, or maybe even in America, for example, etc., etc. So this is just like maybe a first note. On the second note, which is to talk about culture, I still, if you don't mind, maybe define what is culture, so we can know how we can see if we can appropriate it with Islam. Because I see in some aspect of culture, because culture we can see that it has some residues of previous religion, because it includes some superstition and maybe some throwing the salt behind your back or knocking on the woods, etc. These are superstitions that they involve some doctrines and some belief, which obviously that contradicts with Islam. But some aspects of culture, like the way, like for example, the matters of clothing and the matters that entails to the tools, the devices. So we know that creeds and doctrines and aqidah, purely from Islam, worship, we cannot worship without, the default of worship is haram, except what Allah asks us to do. But even the tools to worship, for example, the prayer mat, if you have a technology that your culture provides to make a prayer mat much more comfortable, or a tool that show you the compass towards the Kaaba, these are all tools we can use regardless of what culture they come from. And also the third aspect, which is the tazkiyah, which is fully up to the I like the idea of maybe cleaning the pot, because you are seeing yourself purifying your soul, purifying your nafs through that. So when you have something that is mubah, as long as there is no creed behind it, because the idea of manga and anime, although they have this tawbah of the protagonist, etc., etc., but they are full of symbolism that is rooted in Shinto, Taoism, or Shinto or Taoism or other religions, like to the point that I kind of understand why there is a huge difficulty in loss or in translating the religion, because in our culture, I will finish with this.
Can we keep our questions short?
Yeah.
And if we have any comments or notes, so we can discuss it with Professor Qayyim after the session. So keep
Yes.
it as a question, not a discussion, to keep that.
I just want him to comment on what I mentioned, but just maybe to end with this point, which is the last thing you mentioned about stealing culture or stealing artifacts from countries, what happens in Europe and the museum in Europe. I just remember one anecdote, like they say why pyramids are in Egypt. The answer is because the British could not carry them to their museum. And I want to start with this one. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Actually, your first question about the culture is really important when we think about creating the cultures, because we're now just for discussion, I use for example Islamic cultures. But if you look at the classical Islamic books, nobody used, for example, Thaqafa Islamiyya, before the modernization. It's just I think even the Thaqafa itself is a little bit slightly newly created. As long as you can see the words they use is either urf or ada. The Thaqafa is a little bit sounds like a translated word. But anyway, and even the word cultures have a different meaning in Western civilization and also the Asian civilization. For example, in Western civilization, the opposite word of the culture, kultur, is nature, nature. So this implies that, and it holds, this culture is come from the meaning of cultivate, cultivating yourself. But how they can cultivate? Western people say that they can cultivate their spirituality with a man-made power against nature. So that's why when you visited like in the park, like a garden in France or British, that you can see this national like a garden is so like artificial and also like symmetric. And in the case of Asia, and this culture we call bunka, and an opposite word of the culture is that using like a military power to teach the manner to the people. And the meaning of the culture is that trying to teach like adab to the people without the using power. It means like ta'adib. It's like I think this the meaning of this culture in East Asia is closer to Arabic, Arab. For example, like when they say literature as like in Turkish we call edebiyat, and this meaning of edebiyat means that they can learn the adab from the reading like literature. So when I'm creating or when I'm thinking about the possibility of creating Japanese culture, it doesn't mean that we are trying to create something against some of the nature or against the other like cultures. Like I'm just trying to create like devices or like a method, or either not the devices even, like a method to try to introduce like a spirituality of the adab or like Islam, like without like using power. So this is like real like a meaning of the thinking about the culture in East Asian concept. And second one, actually, this manga thing is also a really important question actually, because so I'm also encouraging like Muslim students to not get too scared about like Japanese manga or the anime, because sometimes parents got too scared that their children so obsessed with the Japanese manga anime, because they're afraid that maybe this Japanese mangas like it will take their children away from like Sirat al-Mustaqim, that they're obsessed with the Japanese culture. Because it is like there are some like inappropriate like contents within the Japanese manga, because in the end this is the content created by like non-Muslims. And they have their own like in philosophy, they have their own like worldview, but this is also same in like literature, and this is also same in a movie. Just open the Netflix, like you can see like millions of the inappropriate like films like exist there. But relatively, Japanese mangas and animes are slightly safer than like the modern like the Western like movies, American movies, especially like the last 4 or 5 years, because still Japanese are trying to convey like their traditional like values. But in the end, what I'm trying to tell, especially like young Muslim like generations, that as long as you know how to interpret these contents and you know how to distinguish what is like Islamically like appropriate, Islamic inappropriate, you know how to like digest this content. But as for in our generation, I think, for example, look at are you watching like Mandalorian, like Star Wars, like a Mandalorian, Star Wars series? Oh, you're watching? I'm so happy. For example, Mandalorian, like in Mandalorian, there is a famous saying by the protagonist, like this is the way. So there is like a minority like a character in this world, in this like Star Wars like series, and they hold like their own creed. And whenever they face like difficulties or challenges, they say that this is our creed, this is the way. And why not we can create like a similar content and like Islamic like a Mandalorian things that the character was saying like hadihi tariqat or something like that. Because what I'm saying is that in the end, this is just the entertainment, but we haven't shown our full creativity by using our traditional the intellectual heritage to introduce our own to Islamic values. And look at before the modernization, actually Islamic civilization was the source of this creativity. Look at the Alif Layla wa Layla, look at the Hayy ibn Yaqzan, look at the life of the Salahuddin. Everybody got inspired by the life of the Salahuddin, or the manaqibs. Manaqib is like heroic stories of the Sufi shuyukh. Like if you look at the history of the modern Europe, actually you can see how the European got inspired by this cultural power of the Ottoman Empire, and unfortunately, when it compared to the past, like we haven't shown this like a cultural power to the non-Muslim society like anymore. And this is really like a recent like thing. Just 100 years ago, actually like this Islamic civilization is source of creativity, and I think so. as I said, for example, is there any like a manga artist or anime artist? Like I encourage that you can just start a thing. Like even though you might face like difficulties, because someone needs to start. And actually, Muslim had been doing this for the more than like 1,000 like years, and just this 100 years, like we just a little bit like step behind of it, like, and just and so like when I'm talking about like this manga anime, like ultimately this is like created by non-Muslims. So there is a limitation. Yes, I admit. But then we can create like we can create like why are not producing like a Hogwarts? Why are not using like a lightsaber? Why are not using this Naruto like a ninjutsu in like with the taste, with the flavor like Islam? Like this is actually the real problem, that we are not inspiring like not like non-Muslim like audiences.
Okay, we have 5 minutes more for questions, so yes, please.
So you talked about kind of creating a subculture for the Japanese, as far as I understood. I am kind of a little interested in the Jewish culture because wherever they went, they created subcultures, and they have their own, let's say, insular communities, their own assimilated communities, and those in between. As far as I understood from the Jews, wherever they went, they learned, for example, the native language and also incorporated some of the elements. But one aspect of them, wherever they went, they to become cohesive, they become, let's say, insular, not fully isolated from the community, but also built their, let's say, own neighborhoods, their own places. Yes, of course, some of them. Yeah, long story short, and for subculture to be born, for example, as foreigners, we can't do it because, let's say, for example, I can reappropriate some of the Christian terminology into Islamic concepts. For example, I use Lord for the Prophet. It's a good enough parallel. But for the Japanese culture, we need equally, fully proficient speakers, and probably there's a low probability for the foreigners to be able to achieve this. But it's not impossible, of course. It's most likely to be born from the reappropriations, and new coinages would most likely born from ethnically Japanese individuals. For example, when the Hebrew language was being revived, the children, first native speaker of the Hebrew after for 2,000 years, he was the one who coined a ton of terms from the zero. Things like that, and of course, culture is it has its own areas, but and this needs an immense amount of cooperation and ideological exchange and idea exchange from the other native Japanese and the foreigners who are well accustomed and integrated into the Japanese culture. Do you have any plans or things about this?
Oh, okay, yeah, actually, it's a very good question. Like, and when I talk about like, the cultures, like, I also sometimes think that, for example, like, even in Turkey, people said that only Turkish can understand like Turkish cultures, but we must not forget that, for example, now we are living in a nation state, but what does like Turkish cultures mean in the first place? For example, in the Turkey, there is like Arab Turkish or the Kurdish Turkish, or the Turkish from, for example, Western Turkish and the Eastern Turkish. Also, they have different cultures, and also in the Arab, in Turkish we call like Arab kökenli like Turkish. Turkish have the Arab origins, but again, what does Arab means? Like there is like Iraqi like Arabs, there is like Syrian Arabs, there is Egyptian Arabs, and Japan is also the same. Like actually, when I use like Japanese Islamic cultures, like many people or Japanese like cultures, like many Japanese also think that Japanese is so difficult language, and we have our own taste of the culture, so only Japanese can understand the true meaning of it. But I think this is wrong in some way. I think half yes and half wrong, because I know one is famous academician, American academician, who specialized in Japanese literature. His name is Donald Keene. And he authored the book called The Pleasure of the Japanese Literature and The Pleasure of Japanese Literature. And he himself is American, but I am inspired that book than any other books that were authored by the Japanese. Because thing is that being born in Japan or being strong in Japan is that it's important, but this is just one part of your element, and this is emanet. And another, that only cherishing this emanet or amana is not enough. Like another important thing as academicians is that you have to build your own perspective, your own method to analyze the cultures or and understand what the core of Japanese culture is. And another example is this about the political things. So for example, right now, some of the far right wings, for example, right wings, they always cherish like Japanese anthem, right? Japanese word anthem, like national songs. But modern Japanese songs, that lyrics itself is from the classical Japanese poem collection, anthologies, but melodies were created by the German and the British. But now most of the Japanese think that sound is so Japanese, even though it was created by British and German. So, but I'm not saying, but here what I want to say is that it doesn't mean that the Japanese culture is a fake. Actually, the culture, studying or contemplating a certain culture, in the end, you will reach the conclusion that there is no nationalistic cultures. Like culture is always open. The culture is always a complex things, which has every element of the civilization. In the same in Turkish, for example, Ottoman Empire. Ottoman culture is not like a Turkic culture. It has Arab element, Persian element, Iraqi element, Syrian element, Egyptian element, Malay element, the Chinese element. For example, do you know Chintamani, Chini Sanat? Chintamani Sanat. It's a certain pattern which are used in the Tazhib Sanat, the golden refinement sanat. And this Chini sanat is actually Buddhist, it's a pattern used by Buddhists in China, in Tibet. But these Ottoman sultans, they use this, they observe this pattern and they use it, and now everybody thinks that this Chini sanat as a Turkic culture. But originally, this is a Chinese culture. But I'm not saying that then this is Chinese culture, the Turkish culture is fake. That the culture is always open. And the culture is just it shows that how complex it is that the human society, complex the human society is. So right now I'm trying to create this Japanese cultural thing, but I'm not saying that this project can only be done by Japanese. Actually, ultimately, I think the people who come from outside of Japanese society can complete this project, because they can put a new vitality to the Japanese cultures. That's why I will never believe that I will be perfectioner of all the Japanese Islamic cultures. I think someone who have Malay origins or Arab origins or the Turkic origin, who come outside of society and who know the beauty of the Japanese cultures and also have the different amana from the other civilization, can put a new interpretation. And when this Japanese society can accept this new vitality, that they can remember that the complex beauty of the human society is. So I'm not showing that. I'm not sure this. Right now, many people say this is the appropriation of the reappropriation. I think appropriation culture, right? Like stealing the cultures from outside. A political appropriation. Of course, when the Kim Kardashian used the word kimono for her underwear, it is political appropriation, yes, because this is not the function of the kimono. But right now, do you know that I also wear the inner kimono, and we call this inner kimono a juban. It's from Portuguese, and can you guess this juban or the origin of juban word? Actually, it's from Arabic. Juban. Jubba. Yes. Actually, the Japanese merchant, they bought this jubba from the Portuguese merchant, and they amazed by the beauty of jubba, so that's why they started to wear it. And now this jubba is become the part of the Japanese culture. So in this sense, but if you are only a superficial, right wing, loser is too strong word. I'm sorry. I mean, the admirer of Japanese culture, you will never understand this historical richness. not horizontal, like historical, vertical, like niche to Japanese culture is. And this is also same in the Islamic culture as well. So, I mean, I think I'm getting like a little bit offline from the other question, but this is why I want to say it. I think that everybody can, my simple answer is that everybody can understand the beauty of Japanese culture, and also everybody can understand the beauty of Islam, the Islamic cultures. And if there's someone who can complete this project, I believe that this is someone from outside of a community, like Donald King in the Japanese literature.
Thank you, Professor Khayyam. Okay, to keep the session on time, so I think now is the time to prepare the specialty with Professor Khayyam. So we will move to the middle of the room, and we will prepare the place before moving to the middle of the room to prepare the matcha tea with Professor Khayyam. Thank you.